The ocean is in love with me. Submitted by Gabie Rivera. I've always loved the ocean. When I was a child, my father used to take me to the beach every year on my birthday. We would spend the day building sand castles and collecting seashells, and then splash around in the cool ocean water when we needed to cool off. We would eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches under the huge rainbow umbrella that he towed along on our trips, and stay and watch the sunset together before driving back home. My father was my best friend. He would take me to the movies and sit through hours and hours of kids' content and never once complained. When I grew up and my taste in movies changed, he would sit through hours of sci-fi films, and never fell asleep during a single movie. He would let me help him in the kitchen even though most of the time, my help only made things messy and difficult, and he never once yelled or expressed frustration with me. He was always calm and steady, happy to explain things to me time and time again. I never knew my mother. My father never talked badly about her, he only told me that they met on a beach while he was traveling one summer, and dated for a year before she handed me to him, got on a bus, and left. She never looked back, and she made sure to take every single piece of herself with her. I had no connection to her, not even a photograph. Sometimes, I wished I knew who my mother was, but those moments were rare. I didn't really miss her, mainly because there was nothing for me to miss and because I felt like my father was enough. When my father died, it was heartbreaking. It was the most immense pain that I have ever felt. More than the time that I fell out of a tree when I was 12 and broke my arm in 2 places. I knew he was sick, and I knew that sooner or later, death would come barging in without even a warning and rip him from the hands of life. But this didn't stop me from crying for a week straight. At his funeral, all that I could hear were my sobs punching their way out of my throat and ricocheting off the walls of the church. I tried to stop them from putting him in the ground, and I vividly remember my uncles holding me back as I watched them lower my father into the earth. Within a few weeks, the area was covered in vibrant green grass, and the only proof that he was ever even there was a marble plaque with his name on it. Julian Miller. Beloved father. I would visit him every week. I didn't bring flowers because I knew that he wouldn't like that. After a while, I started to bake things with the recipes he had taught me and brought them with me to eat while I visited. I figured that if he was somehow watching over me, he would be happy to know that I had finally perfected his apple pie. My first birthday after his death was the first year that I didn't go to the beach. It was too much for me, and I knew that it would never be the same. From then on, I would be celebrating my birthday alone. And the ocean looks a lot scarier when you're alone. I couldn't just forget about it though. I could never forget the beach or the smell of the ocean, or the taste of peanut butter on my tongue and the feeling of the bread sticking to the roof of my mouth while I sat under the large umbrella. And so, I began to paint. I used my father's old bedroom. It seemed fitting since it was because of him that I had fallen in love with the ocean in the first place. I must have painted hundreds of versions of the ocean, but it just wasn't the same. They were still moments, conjured up from fragments of hundreds of different memories, trapped forever on the canvas. And so, 3 years later, I found myself standing with my toes in the sand as I looked out at the endless water in front of me. I thought about getting in and just swimming until I couldn't anymore, until the ocean dragged me down into its depth, but I didn't. Because that wasn't what my father would have wanted. So I sat in the sand and stretched my feet out into the water and watched as the water reached for me as if coming alive and coaxing me in. I swear that I saw the ocean come alive that day. I saw the waves that lapped at the shore transform into hands that grasped at my ankles, climbing up my legs until I was waist deep in the water. Then, I laid back and closed my eyes, listening to the sound of the water moving below the surface. I didn't try to stop it. I didn't try to swim back or open my eyes to make sure I stayed within a safe distance of the shore. I didn't even protest when it dragged me under. Oddly enough, I didn't drown. I opened my eyes and saw that I was surrounded by the blue of the waters, and as I floated there, a couple of feet below the water, I felt as if I didn't need to breathe. I looked down to see the water forming a long, vine-like structure as it wove itself around my legs and up my torso, continuing to drag me further into its depths. I closed my eyes and allowed it to do whatever it wanted. I don't know how long I was down there, but eventually, I floated back up to the top of the water, and I opened my eyes as I was lifted out of the water. Then, I swam back to shore and walked back home. I should have been freaked out. And I was, albeit for the wrong reason. I was afraid that I couldn't die. That this was some kind of sick punishment, and that I would never reunite with my father. The following year, I didn't go to the beach. I stayed home and painted another version of the still waters that I had painted hundreds of times before, only this time, as I was halfway through, I started to cough. I set my paintbrush down and fell to the floor, gasping for air. I thought I was choking, but it took me a few minutes to realize that I wasn't choking. I was drowning. I was drowning in my dead father's bedroom, nowhere near water. I gasped for air, clinging to life, but eventually my mind went blank. I woke up later, surrounded by water. I looked around, confused, thinking that I was dead, but I wasn't. I was back in the ocean, and it was clinging to me, dragging me deeper and deeper. Much deeper than the last time. I started to freak out this time, and I tried to swim up, but the water tightened around my body and yanked me down firmly. Eventually, I let myself give in, and I was once again returned to shore as if nothing had happened. The beach was empty when I crawled out of the water, and I simply got up and walked home. I stopped painting after that, but the ocean was once again calling me back the next year without fail. I woke up in the middle of the night with a start, clawing at my chest and my throat as I felt myself drowning once again. This time, I ran out of my house, not even bothering to lock the door, and ran down to the beach, throwing myself into the water. As soon as I was under, I felt like I had taken a breath of fresh air. Once again, I watched as the ocean dragged me down until I couldn't see a single thing in the darkness, unable to stop it. Then, suddenly, there was light. It was small, like it was coming from a phone or something, and it was down below me. I stared at it as it got closer, growing larger. I was unable to tell if the ocean was dragging me deeper, or if the light was moving towards me. It got closer and closer until it illuminated the entire area around me. I looked around, glancing up, and realized that I couldn't even see the moonlight shining through the water anymore. I floated in place, in the silence, until I heard the sound of something moving through the water somewhere to my left. I looked in that direction until I saw it. A creature that appeared to be made of water, although it looked different than the water that I was surrounded by. It was a lot darker than the water around me, almost black, and had the face of a human, with a long torso with 4 long, tentacle-like arms on either side of it. It had the tail of a crown-tail fish, although much larger and in proportion to the rest of its body. It got closer to me until its face was a mere few inches from mine. It had a flat, round face with green slanted eyes, with 2 pupils in each that stretched from the center of its face, out to each side, and glowed. It had 2 small slits where its nose should have been, and a large slit in its face where its mouth should have been. It stared at me intently for a few seconds, and I tried to swim up, but I couldn't escape the ocean's grasp. It got closer and closer and then opened its mouth, and I watched as a single, long tentacle slithered out and inched towards me, poking into my mouth and then sliding down my throat. I gagged at the salty, bitter taste in my mouth and tried to squirm away without success. After a few seconds, it slid back out and the creature swam away, and I was once again lifted to the top of the waters and carried to the shore. I walked away from the ocean and went back home, shaking in fear. The bitter taste lingered in my mouth for 2 days. I started painting the creature, and all its horridness, finding myself suddenly afraid of the ocean and of the fact that it seemed I would never be able to avoid it again. I tried to wait out the drowning feeling and tying myself down, but I always found myself in the ocean. Every single time, without fail. I knew that I was never going to be able to avoid it again. 10 years after my father's death, I got the diagnosis. It's genetic, they said. As if that made it better. I knew I was going to die soon. And I knew that the ocean would claim me long before it happened. I can't get the image of the creature out of my mind, and I know that it's down there, in the depths of the water, waiting for me. I think back to the days when I would run around in the sand with my father, dancing and splashing in the ocean. I think back to how I felt being there before he died, and how I fell in love with the ocean. And I guess at some point, it fell in love with me too.